There comes a moment, often after 60, when life softly asks a question you may have set aside for years. How much of what you're carrying no longer belongs to you? This question feels different later in life, not with fear, but with a quiet, sacred tiredness. A weariness that comes from holding on longer than your heart ever needed to. For many years you may have tried to control outcomes, protect the people you love, smooth life's rough edges, and keep everything from falling apart. But along the way, a simple and freeing truth begins to appear. Not everything needs your hold. Not everything deserves your worry. And not every chapter asks you to struggle. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that letting go is not a loss. It is a return to your peace, your breath, and your natural rhythm. After 60, this truth feels clearer, more valuable, and more necessary. Life begins to flow again when you stop giving energy to noise that never truly mattered. In this reflection, I'll share 6 Buddhist lessons to help you release what's been weighing you down and rediscover the quiet, effortless freedom waiting beneath your days. Lesson 1. Letting go is not giving up. It's coming home to yourself. There's a misconception many people carry for most of their lives that letting go means surrendering, losing, or quitting. But Buddhist wisdom gently reveals something very different. Letting go is not abandoning your life. It's returning to it. It's stepping out of the exhausting habit of carrying responsibilities, expectations, and fears that were never meant to define you. After 60, this becomes clearer. You've lived long enough to see how often your worry defeated you more than any real circumstance ever did. You've seen how many nights of sleep you lost, not because of what happened, but because of what might happen. You've watched relationships strain under unspoken hopes. You've clung to roles, caretaker, provider, rescuer, peacekeeper, long after life stopped asking you to. Letting go is the moment you finally stop gripping the rope that has been burning your hands. Buddhism teaches that non-attachment is not coldness. It's clarity. It's the understanding that you can love without owning, that you can care without controlling, and that you can show up without losing yourself in the process. Letting go is an act of compassion for your own heart. Ask yourself gently, what am I still holding because I fear who I'll be without it? Is it an old hurt, a memory you replay, a role you've outgrown, a responsibility you feel obligated to carry because you always have? After 60, you've earned the right, the spiritual right, to choose peace over pressure. You've earned the right to unclench your hands, soften your expectations, and allow life to move again without forcing it. Letting go isn't giving up on life. It's giving life back the space to breathe around you. It's choosing yourself again, not in a selfish way, but in a deeply honest one. Because when you stop clinging to things that have expired, you make room for the quiet joys that were waiting for you all along. Simple mornings, sincere conversations, gentler relationships, deeper presence. This is the first lesson. Letting go is a soft return to your own heart, a homecoming after years of wandering through worry. And it's never too late, not at 60, not at 70, not ever, to finally come home. Lesson 2. The freedom of not needing everyone to understand you. One of the heaviest burdens people carry through adulthood is the need to be understood, approved of, or validated by others. But something shifts after 60. You begin to taste the quiet freedom of not needing your life to make sense to anyone but you. Buddhist teachings speak often about the suffering that comes from attachment to opinions, both our own and others. When you attach your peace to how people perceive you, you become tangled in their expectations, their judgments, and their misunderstandings. You start shaping your behavior around what they might think, rather than what your heart knows to be true. But here's the subtle liberation age brings. You no longer have the energy to perform for the world. You no longer need to convince anyone that your path is worthy. You've lived enough life to know that people will misunderstand you whether you exhaust yourself trying to explain or stay silent and protect your peace. Letting go of the need to be understood is one of the most powerful shifts you'll ever make. It doesn't mean withdrawing from others or refusing connection. It means releasing the grip of approval. It means recognizing that your choices do not require permission. It means understanding that those who truly resonate with your heart will understand without explanation, and those who don't will remain confused no matter how carefully you speak. There is deep Buddhist wisdom in silence, the kind that doesn't prove anything but reveals everything. When you stop explaining yourself, you reclaim energy that was leaking out through worry. You reclaim hours of mental conversation with people who weren't even in the room. You reclaim the freedom to live as you are, not as you are perceived. Ask yourself, how much of my life have I spent trying to be understood? And what would happen if I simply lived instead? After 60, you're allowed to walk away from opinions that drain you. You're allowed to take the quieter path that makes sense only to your soul. You're allowed to let people misunderstand you and still sleep peacefully at night. This is the second lesson. Your peace is too precious to be held hostage by anyone's misunderstanding. Let go of the need to be understood, and you'll rediscover a kind of freedom that feels like air returning to your lungs. There comes a time, often past 60, when you begin to understand something you couldn't fully grasp earlier in life. Most of the suffering you carried wasn't caused by the world around you. It was shaped by your own thoughts about it. Not because you were weak, but because you cared deeply. Because you wanted life to be steady, predictable, safe. Yet Buddhism teaches that much of our pain comes from resisting the natural movement of the mind, trying to force it to be quiet, stable, or obedient. But the mind was never designed to be controlled. It was designed to be understood. After 60, you've lived through enough storms to recognize a quiet truth. The mind is like weather. It shifts, it changes, it moves through cycles. Thoughts rise, fall, dissolve, and return. Worry comes like a cloud, not a destiny. Sadness visits like a season, not a verdict. Fear appears like a gust of wind, not a prophecy. The suffering begins when we mistake these passing states for permanent truths, when we believe every anxious thought, when we chase every fear, when we cling to old stories that no longer serve us. But here's what wisdom and age begin to teach you. The mind loses its power when you stop wrestling it. Buddhism calls this non-resistance. Not shutting your thoughts down, not fighting them, not drowning them out with distractions, just letting them be. Watching them the way you would watch waves rise and fall on the shore. Observing without gripping, allowing without absorbing. There is profound relief in no longer treating every thought as a command. There is peace in not needing to fix what you feel. There is clarity in becoming the witness rather than the battleground. Ask yourself, how many times have I believed a thought that never came true? How many fears dissolved the moment I stopped feeding them? When you reach your 60s, a new kind of courage emerges. Not the loud, determined courage of youth, but a softer courage. The bravery to release urgency. The bravery to stop debating with your inner critic. The bravery to say, that's just a thought. It's not who I am. Because when you stop fighting your mind, life begins to feel lighter. You no longer judge yourself for having emotions. You no longer spiral into imaginary futures. You no longer exhaust yourself trying to stay in control of something that was never under your authority. This shift opens doors you didn't even know were closed. You suddenly sleep more deeply. You speak more gently. You worry less about what might happen and live more in what is happening. You begin to savor stillness. You realize that peace wasn't a destination. It was a permission you had to give yourself. This is the third lesson. Ease begins the moment you stop trying to force your mind into silence and instead learn to let your thoughts pass like clouds across an open sky. At 60 and beyond, this isn't just a teaching, it's a gift you give yourself after decades of carrying what was never yours to hold. Lesson 4. The quiet power of detaching from roles you've outgrown. For much of your life, you carried titles that shaped your identity. Parent, partner, worker, caregiver, problem solver, peacekeeper, the one who remembers everything, the one who carries everyone. These roles were meaningful. They mattered. They shaped your days and gave you purpose. But Buddhist wisdom teaches something subtle and profound. Roles are clothes for the soul, not the soul itself. They are meant to be worn, not fused to your skin. After 60, many people face a gentle but unsettling transition. Children grow into their own lives. Careers slow down or end. Responsibilities shift. And the identity you held for decades begins to soften. This can feel like loss if you cling to it, or freedom if you learn to let go. Buddhism calls this egolessness, not in a negative sense, but in a compassionate one. It's the understanding that who you are is far deeper than what you do for others. The world taught you to measure your worth by productivity, accomplishment, or usefulness. But life beyond 60 begins to whisper a different truth. You don't need a role to be worthy. You don't need a title to matter. You don't need constant doing to justify your existence. Letting go of outdated roles does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop exhausting yourself by fulfilling expectations that no longer nourish your spirit. Ask yourself, what roles am I still performing out of habit rather than joy? Whose needs am I still putting above my own because I always have? Detaching from roles brings a profound shift. You begin to live for presence rather than performance. You begin to choose peace over perfection. You begin to honor your needs with the same tenderness you once offered everyone else. And something beautiful happens when you loosen your identity. Your relationships transform. Conversations deepen. Your presence becomes enough. Not your labor, not your fixing, not your sacrificing, just your presence. You begin to enjoy moments instead of managing them. You begin to listen without trying to solve. You begin to exist without trying to justify why you deserve rest. This is where life starts to feel different, not empty, expansive, not lonely, spacious, not meaningless, open to new meaning. At 60 and beyond, you are allowed to redefine who you are. You are allowed to experience the world with new eyes. You are allowed to love from a place of freedom, not obligation. This is the fourth lesson. Letting go of roles you've outgrown is not the end of your identity. It is the beginning of discovering who you truly are beneath everything you've ever carried. And this discovery brings a kind of peace that only maturity, reflection, and surrender can offer. One of the most transformative Buddhist teachings is the idea of releasing attachment to outcomes, not because outcomes don't matter, but because clutching them with tightness suffocates the very life we are trying to shape. For decades, you may have lived believing that your effort determined everything, that if you worried enough, planned enough, controlled enough, things would turn out right. But after 60, a soft truth begins to rise. Many things you once tried so hard to control ended up unfolding in their own way anyway. Some beautifully, some painfully, some unexpectedly, but almost all beyond the reach of your anxiety. Life has always had its own intelligence. You just spent years thinking it was your job to manage it. When you loosen your grip on outcomes, something profound shifts inside you. You stop living in fear of the future. You stop rehearsing disasters that never arrive. You stop forcing timing that isn't ready. You stop chasing people who aren't meant to stay. And you begin experiencing something quieter, deeper, and more honest. Flow. Flow is not passive, It's not resignation. It's not saying, I don't care. It's saying, I trust. It's saying, I'll do my part, and the rest is not mine to control. Buddhism teaches that attachment to outcomes grows from fear. Fear of loss, fear of the unknown, fear of being disappointed. Letting go of outcomes, on the other hand, grows from trust. Not blind trust, but trust shaped by life. The kind that says, I've lived long enough to know that things often unfold in surprising ways. Asking yourself, what if things turn out better than I expect, feels more natural with age. Look back at your life. How many times did you fear everything would fall apart, only to see life guide you somewhere better? How often did a closed door lead you in a new direction? How many times were your worries louder than reality? This is what loosening your grip feels like after 60. Your breathing softens. Your sleep deepens. You stop bargaining with life and begin working with it. Letting go of outcomes also changes how you relate to others. You stop needing people to meet your expectations and allow them to be who they are. You stop waiting for disappointment and start noticing the present. You stop measuring love by results and begin to feel it through presence. Your days move at a gentler pace. You feel more thankful for small moments because you're no longer rushing past them towards some imagined finish line. You begin to live moments fully without the constant weight of what comes next. Ask yourself, what outcomes am I holding on to so tightly that they are stealing my peace? And what might happen if I loosened my grip even a little? Here is the quiet miracle. When you let go of outcomes, you don't lose direction. You release tension. You don't lose drive. You release fear. You don't lose control. You let go of the idea that you ever needed it. Life begins to move more freely when you stop trying to force it. You start to trust timing instead of being afraid of it. You begin to notice guidance where you once looked past it. You see small signs, gentle nudges, unexpected connections. This is the fifth lesson. When you stop insisting that life follow your exact plans, you open space for it to unfold in ways more beautiful than you imagined. And as you grow older, you see more clearly that this isn't just a teaching. It's how life has always worked, beneath your worries and beyond your control. Lesson 6. The quiet strength of living lightly. There is a kind of strength that doesn't look strong at all, not the strength of pushing, proving, or enduring, but the strength of living lightly. It becomes especially meaningful after 60, when your spirit softens and your priorities begin to shift. Buddhist wisdom teaches that lightness is not weakness, it is what happens when you release what was never meant to last. To live lightly means you are no longer trapped by your past. You stop holding on to old disappointments, old mistakes, or old versions of yourself. You understand that life is impermanent, and instead of fearing that truth, you lean into it. You let things arrive and pass. You let people come and go. You allow feelings to rise and fall without trying to hold them in place. Living lightly is not carelessness. It is clarity. It is knowing what deserves your care and what is meant to be released. After 60, you may notice your heart resists heaviness in ways it didn't before. You have carried enough. You have weathered storms, known joy, survived loss, raised families, built careers, and given more of yourself than most will ever know. And now your spirit longs for something else: space, ease, gentleness, time. Buddhism teaches that when you stop gripping life so tightly, life finally has room to offer its gifts. When you stop forcing outcomes, the right ones unfold in their own time. When you stop trying to control everything, peace comes to sit beside you like an old friend returning home. Ask yourself softly, where can I make my life lighter? Which habits, duties, or thoughts have become too heavy? What might happen if I simply set them down? Living lightly means trusting that life will support you, even when you stop holding everything together. It means choosing gratitude over worry, presence over pressure, and inner calm over outside noise. This is the sixth lesson. Your greatest strength now is not force, but gentleness. Not carrying the world, but moving through it with a lighter, freer heart. Lightness is not the absence of responsibility. It is the presence of peace. You've lived long enough to know that letting go is not an ending. It is the beginning of what truly matters. These 6 lessons are not rules, but invitations, inviting you to breathe deeper, walk more gently, and trust that life still has quiet gifts waiting for you. As you release what no longer serves you, you make room for what truly does. And in that space, life begins to flow again, easily, naturally, beautifully.